Hello.
Hi, how are you? You all right?
I'm doing well.
Good. Nice to meet you.
I can see you, Nicole. Are you? I guess you. I can't. I guess only the host can see us, right?
Okay.
Well, now everyone can see you and everyone can hear you. So welcome.
Perfect.
We've got Nicole and Veenod, and soon to join, we're going to have a few other people, Erik Jan Bijvank and Jaroslav from OpenEXO. Let me see if I can successfully pull up some slides here. Let's see if I can pull that off. Share screen. Share screen. There we go. I think that works all right, I believe.
Okay.
Let's see how it goes. So let me see. No, that's not going to work. This is going to work. So maybe Nicole, let me do a brief introduction, and then as you're taking over, as part of the panel of experts, the first of the 6 chapters. So let me just do a brief introduction and hand over to you, and I'll keep an eye out for when the others are joining as well. Back in January, we brought a group of people together, literally from all over the world, into Amsterdam in the evening, had a light meal, and basically confronted the question of what do all these exponential opportunities, these exponential changes, transformations, as leadership of organizations, small and large, what does that mean to us? And what you see on the screen now is the panel of experts. And this is everybody from Jim Cronin from Growth Tribe, Raz Najarian from ELP Network, Leadership Network, Peter Martin and Yordi are both related to Singularity. Adrian and Nicole in the bottom right, as well as myself, are with SNS. I'm an associate with SNS, the change transformation organization that is wildly successful in the UK and now moving into the Netherlands. And some of these other people you will meet throughout the morning. So what we ended up doing was breaking into small groups, really wrestling with some of these issues, and eventually produced an orange paper with the outcome. And in the notes of this session, you can get the link to that white paper. And this is essentially a summary of that from the words of the experts. We just heard from Craig about why this is happening, and this is just a few of the samples. Of course, Craig's masterclass just now was an excellent introduction, much better than I could do, and certainly on one slide. So autonomy, of machines, the AI coming at us, additive manufacturing, 3D printing, are just a few of the opportunities and challenges, facing markets and companies. So when we consolidated the opinions, the expertise, the anecdotes, the stories from these 15 people over about, 3-4 hours, we boiled it down to 6 points. And I'm about to hand it over to Nicole to talk about the first point, which is context is king. And the reason why we put this one first is the context is changing, both internal and external. Because the context is changing, the amount of data that you can turn into knowledge is increasing in its volume, in velocity, and that's the second point. In order to deal with that, of course, there's what we call safely self-managing, and what is also called autonomous, self-organizing, organizations, holacracy. There's lots of different words in a way, but effectively the command and control organization can no longer support that. And so we'll dive into that a little bit. Because it's self-managed, typical, rules, regulations, rigidity doesn't work nearly as much. So you definitely need a binding purpose, both external and internal. And in order to actually respond to that, it needs to be an experimentation and adaptation culture. And then the last one that Jaroslav, who I see has now joined, I'll bring him on the stage soon as well, will share really the personal leadership challenge with that. And so from this amazing group of people, these are the 6 sort of highlight themes that came out. And I would really urge you to go to the link and get that white paper. I believe I've got the link at the end of the slides as well. We have about an hour and a half for this session to go in. I'll be watching the comments and bring those comments in as well. So with that, Nicole Wright from SNS.
Perfect. So my name is Nicole Wright. I'm from Glasgow in Scotland. I'm currently coming to you from Surrey, just outside of London. But typically I spend a lot of my time in the Netherlands. So my background is 15 years of headhunting, building transformation teams for kind of large organizations. And in the last 2 or 3 years, I've moved into consulting. So I think I've probably got a slightly different perspective on some of these topics to some of the SMEs and the technical and the doctors that we have in this group. But,
Nicole, can you speak a little closer to the microphone? It's chopping up. But
sorry.
Thank you.
Yes, I was just saying that my background is very much in people and human capital and building teams. And when we talk about context being king, it's a very broad topic, but it's empirical when it comes to any kind of change and transformation project. So we'll all be very familiar with a McKinsey stat from 5 years ago. 70% of all change and transformations fail. Actually, that's going in the wrong direction. As of today, it's 84% of transformations fail. And one of the things that is at the core of that is not technology. Technology has advanced exponentially, and technology cycles overlap decision-making cycles of organizations left, right, and center. What's not changed and what's not advanced actually is the ability for organizations to create a culture of engagement which can consume change at the same rate which technology is advancing. So the speed of change requires us all to be really situationally aware and able to adapt at a faster pace. But there are very few organizations, going by the facts, 16% of organizations who are actually in a situation where they're winning the war on change. So just setting the scene on that, in terms of this topic, context being king, I've got 3 little subheadings for you. So first off is inside and outside. Second is short and long term. And third is fighting and growing. And you'd probably be right in thinking these all seem very paradoxical. And actually it's very true. Organizations who are doing extremely well in exponential thinking, exponential growth, and exponential leadership are constantly walking on the tightrope and iterating, changing, and in beta mode. So a lot of these themes that I'm going to talk to you about might seem paradoxical, but actually it's not thinking that's against each other. It's getting that road right and getting the right balance of those topics. So on the first issue, inside and outside, historically CEOs have been managers of people within the walls of the organisation. But in a lot of different senses, COVID has blown those walls apart. And it's no longer about command and control. It's no longer about managing people that are within your physical geography. It's about managing the organisation, the culture, and the brand beyond the realms of what actually you can control. We're also seeing a large amount of organisations like Uber or Airbnb coming in and owning the customer experience from organisations. So organisations are being disintermediated by competitors that they didn't actually ever see. coming into their kind of realm of possibility. So I think what we're saying is that organisations that put passion and purpose at the core of what they do are the ones who are superseding organisations who are just treading the line and being subservient to the board. Example of that in the last, I think January actually, in the press line, there was a chap who was working for Veenod Bank, and they're located in a remote part of the Netherlands, and they were recruiting Java developers, paying well below market rate, but they were able to attract top-end talent from some of the best universities around Europe, because people today want to do work that is meaningful and purposeful to them. So we're seeing a dramatic shift from command control to enablement, collaboration, and also individuals wanting to not just do work that is available, but work that they feel really passionate about. And in terms of short and long term, we talk about serving the customer today, but also thinking about the customer who we're going to be serving in the future. So one of the things that came up in the last conversation was around using data to drive customer experience. We have our product panel at SNS, and one of the things that they say is if you're designing a product around the customer experience of today, you're not getting it right for tomorrow because you're already using data that's out of date. So we have to be mindful of the fact that we're designing and driving products today that may not be right for our future customer. Again, COVID example is that my gran had never used online shopping. She would never put a bank card into a website. But with the advent of COVID and being a vulnerable adult, all of a sudden, she does all of her shopping online. And I don't think that will ever change. So I think what we're seeing is change in customer behaviour and customer experience for the short term that may well have consequences in the long term. Last of pricing and growing, we're talking about the context of organisations being fundamentally different for those fighting for survival to those fueling hyper growth. So there's not going to be a more pitch perfect situation to highlight this example. I'm speaking every day to execs around the globe, and some are thinking, let's hunker down, let's not spend any money, let's just see if we can weather this storm and we'll see what comes out the other end. But the ones who are really thinking about thriving and not surviving are the ones who are putting their capex and every spare penny they've got into innovation, driving change, and trying to come out of this with a real point of difference and a real differentiator in the market. So one of the quotes that I really liked from the session that we had was, I work with various banks and I tell them, stop worrying about fintechs, worry about tech fins. They're tech companies who can buy a financial license and come for you. I think we're going to find a variety of organizations exactly like that, who are data rich, purpose driven, and who could quite easily, off the back of COVID, come at any organization and any industry and be a real threat. So thanks very much. That's me.
Shall I jump in?
Chris, you are muted. Chris.
I just introduced you very wonderfully. So because we're not going to go into velocity of knowledge. Thanks.
Chris, can you just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me well? Just the sound as well. Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So thank you for that wonderful introduction. Velocity of knowledge. Now, you know, the context that we are having these discussions, when that amazing panel came together, you know, in the beginning of this year, we were talking about leadership in exponential times. And I was, you know, now revising my thoughts about this, you know, for this series. I think there are two dimensions to this thing, right? One is we are living in this exponential times, and then what is more exponential than this virus at the moment, right? It's yet another example of that, the kinds of disruptions, not just as a disease and so on, but then in terms of the impact in the rest of society. And so the question there, and what we are rightfully discussing, is how do you manage in this world? What are the leadership attributes and so on that we need in this kind of exponential times? And then the other thing for me was, how do you create exponentiality? What is exponentiality for you, right? So if one is right.
Oh, we lost him a bit. Hopefully when he syncs up again, we'll get him back on how to create exponential times. Because that's sort of a magic answer that I'm looking for. Okay, so while he's there, does somebody else want to jump in just a little bit? I'll just pick on maybe Nicole. Do you want to jump back in quickly?
Yeah, so I think just going back to part of the point for my session was that the availability of data now is exponential. For a very long time, we've been talking about advent of cloud, we've been talking about advent of data, but a lot of organizations I speak to, and Chris and I are working with one of them, they are data rich but information poor. You've got so many. Oh, sorry, Sandeep.
I don't know what happened. It just dropped like that. Like my Wi-Fi suddenly went off. There you go. Disruption. I forget where I left off when it started to. But I'll summarize like this. I think there are two parts to this thing, where so the notion that we are there's a tiger out there and you're trying to ride it, right? That exponential tiger, and the other one is whether you can breed one, right? And I wanted to put that in this context of velocity of knowledge, because this, I think, is the one that has the most empowering opportunities, right? So let's get into this and in the dimensions of it, which is, and I said, if knowledge is the currency of transformation and exponentiality, then data is the matter, is the printed data, right? So the three components of these things is the data has to exist in some form or fashion. You need to know how to process it, right? Who's going to do it? Humans, machines, and so on, and all the different techniques, and then what you do about it, right? Based on that information. Listening to some of the earlier speakers, the recurring theme here is no matter what you do, ultimately it always comes down to the idea of a time to decision, right? How quickly can you make decisions based on what you have learned, right? So the challenge here is and the opportunity is to first consider whether you have the right information. Now, in many respects, outside of the big names that we know of, like the Googles and so on, people whose ecosystem is so big that they have a lot of internal data, or we are leaving data for them to consume. Most every other company needs a combination of some internal and external data, right? And even those companies, like where I came from, big telcos and those kind of things, for years ignored the kind of data. Still, they still do the kinds of information and data that they have even in the existing network, because it takes context, what Nicole was talking about, to understand what to do with it, right? Even if the information exists, you don't know what you have. And frequently, the data that you have is not usable data, right? So in the context of internal, external, you need to have a sense of what, when you establish your context and things like that, what is it that you need? What's the kind of data that's going to start becoming useful? Do you have it inside? Do you have it outside? How are you going to bring it together? And where is it going to be stored? One of the biggest fallacies out there is that there's actually data to be used. A lot of the times, this data exists only for a little time, right? I saw there was an interesting statistic. By 2026, like a 787 can produce anywhere from 5 to 8 terabytes of data per flight, right? So just imagine the amount of information that's coming in. So it's not just the fact that the data actually exists, but you've got to do something about it in somewhere near real time if you're going to make a decision based on that information. So that brings you to, the human and machine. It's not necessarily vice versa. It's a question of, where do you play, right? Now, increasingly, machines can move the analytics for you much faster and in a much more recursive way than some of the humans can. But nevertheless, the instrumentation of all these things has to be human-led, right? And this is where a lot of the opportunities are, right? So, if you wanted to set up a deep learning machine, you still have to instrument that deep learning machine for whatever patterns you want it to recognize. And even if it can build on its own, inferences later on, it's still something that, human beings, and usually very high-end talent, right? This is not something that you can just fall off and then say, okay, well, I'm just going to have the machine do it. There's a lot of complexities and knowledge involved. And the opportunity in this new economy is where people can place themselves, to harvest this opportunity. Right, and then the last one is really, what do you do with it, right? So whether it is some information about your customer base, the efficiency of your operations, and so on, you need to get these three things into a very tight, circle, right? So of action, reflection, and modifying, right? The next levels and so on. It all has to be very connected. So, where does your data live? Is it usable data? Who's curating it? Who's managing it? What is the kind of talent that you need for it? What are the processes that you need, right? And of course, underlying all of these things is the cybersecurity kind of data. I haven't gone into it deeply, but you keep those in mind with respect to your particular industry and what you're trying to do. And then coming out of that is really this knowledge, right? You're converting data into knowledge, into intelligence, into wisdom, right? And that is the opportunity. And this is one of those places where you can create that, right? It's a lot of the times things are happening around you, and then you need to figure out, how do I write it, which is fine. But in this case, if you're in a particular small company, big company, you can look to see what are those factors for you. Are you creating, is this something that can exponentially grow for you? And knowledge is clearly one of those things, right? It's the thing that underpins a lot of capabilities. Even those examples that you see from Salim and others, underlying all of it is knowledge, right? Economy, right? And it's for nothing that we call it velocity of knowledge, because velocity, speed with direction, right? We didn't say speed of knowledge, we said velocity of knowledge, which means there is a trajectory, and it's an upward trajectory, and it's growing exponentially, or that is the opportunity for it, right? So that is a little bit of my 2 cents on this thing, and what gets me excited about it is, I think, beyond the leadership attributes around this, I think it's one of those areas so that if you look closely at it, you can potentially create your own exponential dimension. Thank you very much.
Great. Veenod, would you introduce yourself a little bit? Because I think in the beginning, I think we might have missed that. Yeah.
Oh, sure. I think so. Quick background is I've been in around the cable telecom entertainment industry for the last 20+ years. Most recently as the CIO type CTOs, and I'm currently in rehab from all that.
Rehab, temporarily unemployable. Nice.
That may be permanently.
Perfect. Let me take over from that myself. Again, Chris Parker, host for the work-life stage here today. So you're going to see me probably too much over these next couple of days on the work-life stage. I do 3 things. I do corporate leadership roles. So just up until recently, I was the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer of PowerPeers. And one of the reasons I was really attracted to join PowerPeers is they are, in fact, an EXO, an exponential organization. And later today, they will present. So the management team of PowerPeers will present, and I will be hosting and harassing them during that presentation as well. The second thing I do is coaching and mentoring through organizations like Rockstart, as well as my own brand, Ebullient. And after this, there is a interview, a conversation pre-recorded with Paul Epping, also from the EXO community. He's based in Dubai. And tomorrow there's a lot more of these pre-recorded interviews, which are part of these are sort of sneak previews to my soon-to-be launched podcast called Everyday Entrepreneurs Everywhere. And what I've discovered is everyone I've spoken to, and we've done about 25 interviews, everyday does not mean average. These are incredible people, as you'll see from Paul just after that. Last thing I do, and I'm probably taking too much time on my introduction, but I'm going for it, is a film producer. And the reason I'm particularly bringing that up is today at 7 o'clock on this channel, a talented young producer, Magdalena, who has just finished her first short film. We have an interview, a conversation with her. And then at 7:30, the director. And then on the global main stage, we have, I'm so proud of this, Linda Jacobson, who is the subject, writer, and actress of this short film, has been picked for the global main stage at 8 o'clock. So I would really urge everyone to go check that out. So I was also part of the expert team, sort of, instigating a little bit the mashup of experts hosted by SNS, who I'm doing work through, helping Nicole bring that into the Netherlands, and Jaroslav, the Chief Learning Officer from OpenEXO, was kind enough to come up from Spain for the day, give us a primer, and really got us off going, and so he will be closing the session. So safely self-managing is something that is quite personal, I think, and passionate to me, because as a CTO and CIO, I like to call myself, a non-technical CTO, if that makes any sense at all. Because with a background of accounting and a huge passion and focus on customer experience design and customer centricity, looping back a little bit to what, if you watched the earlier event with Craig, about the connection and the adaptation to customer need almost in real time. And that's, for me, is what technology should be doing. Now, what I'd love to see in the trend in organizational dynamics with topics like holacracy and agile, other techniques like Scrum, the autonomy of organizations that we talked about, self-managing teams, we talked about 20 years ago, we're actually now seeing them. And more importantly, leadership is now enabling them. And I think what I've observed while implementing, if you can implement man-side, shifting mindset towards agile thinking, the work is always actually in my head, in leadership head, and also my colleagues' mindset. It's easy to write, read the book. It's easy to go on the course. However, when proverbial shit hits the fan, does leadership actually allow these autonomous self-managing teams to actually solve the problem, or do they fall back into their traditional command and control? And so for myself, while building self-managing teams, that I do not want to direct on a daily basis, because quite frankly, the people in the teams are much smarter, much brighter, much more driven, much more creative than I can ever be, for an entire organization. So what I work to do is create that space. One of the quotes that came out of the paper is, in a pancake system, and by pancake, there's lots of little pancakes everywhere. This is the first time I heard that term. It's kind of a nice little thing. So all these little pancakes everywhere. You need to have a clear vision that is shared and known by everyone, so everyone can actually act towards that goal, doing what they need to achieve. I've cheated a little bit because I control the slides, and I have another supporting slide here, so I'll go to that. The way I see it, vision, and again, I put the link to the paper in the notes, and it's also on the agenda item at Campus Party. So you can go to the paper, and there's a whole section on this, but there's the vision and adaptation. So not only to have a strong vision, but also have the wherewithal and the ability to adapt it, which is maybe a contradiction. There's autonomy and control, because I like to call it self-managing. I picked that up somewhere, as opposed to self-organizing. I think for a leader or a manager, it's actually that role's job to organize in order for other people to manage themselves. And I think it's a small change of language, but it's very meaningful. And then there's the question of the balance between when do you challenge them to do more, or are they maybe, out of their, not comfort zone, because that's where you want them to be sometimes, but out of their ability, are they going into an area of just incompetence, and they're doing something that is perhaps just, they'll fail, so management has failed by putting them in a place where they will fail. A few techniques, and I've got another 13 minutes on this, around vision adaptation. So the different lines there are about the lines on the left are about each of the points on the right there. So one of the things I have done with Power Peers is the simple canvas, the simplicity scan, and you can get that at my website, edbulliant.com. It doesn't matter which canvas it is. It can be an EXO canvas, a business model canvas, but whatever the tool is to have that meaningful conversation, not only with the leadership, but the whole organization, and then ideally bring it down to a single page. And that single page, although it's abstracted, it at least gives somebody, it gives the ability to have debates, and it gives the ability to know what you violently agree on and violently disagree on. OGSM, the Objectives, Goals, Strategies, Measures, is something that is really popular in the Netherlands. It's also a one-page strategy. So maybe a business model canvas or an EXO canvas, maybe it's a little bigger picture, but if you want to translate that into action, so what is the objective for this period? What are the goals and how are we going to measure them? You can put that on an OGSM or another document. And perhaps the most powerful thing in it's called big room planning. I think also called open space technology sometime. Well, a little bit of a mix there, but big room planning where as part of scaled agile, at least, and you don't have to adopt all of SAFe or scaled agile, but on a quarterly basis, what we did, and it worked brilliantly, is have the whole development team, the extended development team, offsite, or at least out of their normal workplace. A little bit hard with COVID now, I know, but still, when we get back to the next normal, it'll be possible again. And we started by having, in the beginning, forcing leadership to actually present the vision and the strategy and the horizon for the next, months and perhaps a year. So essentially, we had leadership standing in front on a quarterly basis, telling people what the big picture was. Then we had customers. So we've actually brought in customers to present what that strategy means to them. And so before we allowed the teams to pick the epics and the things they needed to do for the next 3 months, the first thing we started with is, here's the purpose, here's the vision, here's the strategy, here's what the customers want. Now, based on what you've just heard, will you please start self-prioritizing, talk to your product owners, and eventually evolve in that open space how they believe they can achieve that. And basically, it's a coaching, mentoring role from then on. Of course, you have to challenge, and then you can interrupt a bit. But the first time, it's completely wonky, uncomfortable, a bit painful, confusing. But by the third or fourth time, by that year, I personally will not manage large teams without such a technique, because it's so bonding, and without that, what I find is people just start to wander away and get lost. So that's a bit on the vision part. So that's the overall purpose and the direction side. And then there's, in this sort of thing, there's the sort of the guide rails. And then I'll get into sort of the foundation. So there's an overall piece, there's some guide rails, and then a foundation. Now, the guide rails are make it very clear on what not to do. Leading tech teams, and particularly if it's a diverse tech team with a lot of different people backgrounds, everyone has their own opinion on architecture, on frameworks, on ways of working. At a certain point, you need to collectively make a decision and then make that decision very clear. Granted, the third point on this is the exception process, because inevitably any decision you make will be wrong at some point. And so if you stick to a decision and rigidly stick to it, well, that's going to be frustrating and wasteful. So, but when you've made a decision, say, okay, peoples, we have decided, for this framework, for this, stack of whatever we're working on, for the next 6 months, we understand that there's weaknesses, and we will inspect and adapt. So basically, we're going to learn the games by learn the rules by playing the game, let it go, and then as leadership, it is an obligation, put it in your agenda and actually come back to that and say, okay, you trusted me by, just following this for 6 months. Did it work? Oftentimes it works. So they go, yeah, we're good. We learned it. We figured it out. It's different than we liked, but we're good. And sometimes they say, no. Rarely, actually, they say, no, things have evolved. This is just not working. We need to change. And then you can have a conversation. So those 2 points are more on sort of what not to do. And then there's the thing on values. And for me, values are fascinating, because what I would not recommend is come up with some sort of values that you believe that the team should have, because that's not a team values, that's your values, and you're trying to impose it. I've also seen some not brilliant exercises where there's like 6 or 7 people on a management team, and each of them put their own value in, and then they listed those, and those are our values. Nah, so not really helpful. So what I like to do is if you're having issues within the team, as far as potential toxicity or some sort of funk in the environment that's distracting and wasting energy, human energy. Because if you don't have a problem to solve, then why even talk about values? Maybe it's good to have if you have a lot of people changing, but then, okay, let's talk about what are our values and how to behave and how not to behave. And one great example there is respect people's time. What does that mean? You can write it, but then there's already 100 definitions of what that means. Does that mean we have to start our meeting on time? Well, that almost means by definition that we will not end our meeting on time. That we will be disrespecting someone on the other side. Or does it mean that actually respect people's time means if you don't need to be somewhere, you don't have to show up? Is that okay as well? So some of these things, as far as this rules of the game, and a technique I like to put in there is it's actually called a WOW document. Keep it brief, but it's a way of working document. So if you, and again, it's not written by me. It's like, okay, if we're having a tension somewhere, some sort of friction that is not necessary, because there are frictions, and we need to collectively solve it, well, then just make a WOW document, write it there, and publish it. And then say, okay, well, this is how we've agreed to behave, and these are our values, and this is what we said we would do and not do. So now I'm down at the bottom part, the how to challenge and support. And for me, this, if we're talking about leadership in any case, and not only exponential leadership, if it is different than servant leadership, because that was another thing we argued and wrestled with as an expert team, was when do you have the wisdom to not give someone help? And that's hard. Because if I've learned early on in my career from a manager, Tom Carey, now I think retired in Florida, and he gave me his secret of management and leadership was, he said, you just find talented people that are passionate about something, and you assign them to tasks that they happen to be passionate about, and then you get out of their way. Check. And later I've added, and know when to support them or not. Because if you've attached, if you've assigned someone to an assignment that maybe they just have to stand on their toes a bit more, and maybe they have to get a bit more creative and they can still achieve it, then you can give them inspiration and support, that type of leadership. And sometimes if you can see they're going to crumble, emotionally or otherwise, or become in a psychologically or physically safe, unsafe state, then know when to actually reach in and say, I'm here. I see that you're struggling. We have committed to something which is not possible. Let's either change the target, get you support, reassign you. And that's really hard. That's a hard discussion. The last thing on that is collaboration tooling. And this is part of the foundation piece, because if you're doing things like agile, safe, even holacratic organizations, they need some ways of working and way of communicating. It's not, people aren't just running around random, assigning themselves boss and going crazy. No, there is actual discipline and structure to the organization in order to allow it to be self-managing. And some of the collaboration tooling that I think is just brilliant all has to do with visualization. So the simplest thing is a Kanban board, and that could be stickies on a wall. Okay, this is what the backlog is. This is what we've agreed we're going to do in the next period, sprint, whatever time frame it is, doesn't matter. This is what we're doing. This is what we've done. It can be that simple. My nature is always to overcomplicate it, so I like to surround myself with people who will further simplify it. The challenge there, and again, is the decision making, and again, that's not easy. And this is where leadership during exponential times comes in. Is with so much going on, so velocity of knowledge coming in from so many different places, the context changing so often. How do you not drive your people literally insane by changing the goalpost every 5 minutes? And simple visualization strategies like that are, okay, leader, person, manager, you have the right to put things in the backlog and prioritize it. However, you do not have the right, without a proper discussion, whatever the little mini governance is, to get it on the to-do list. And that, what I find that protects the teams from me and my other, sort of executives or managers from harassing them and driving them insane. And again, whatever agreement you make for that, put it in your WOW document. And that, our value is you are self-managing. Our value also is I need to be able to direct. Those things are in conflict. So this is a technique that we can implement rather easily to start, and then inspect and adapt and refine it over time. So as you can see, I had so much fun at this meeting with these experts. I learned new terms like pancake organizations and other things. A lot of it we were in violent agreement, and intolerance for incompetence is coming up, and for me that was mind-blowingly just spot on, and I had not thought of that before. And so that will come up in a section or two. So
sorry, Chris, to interrupt you. Just before you come on to that, one of the things that I have learned from Chris, amongst many different things, is if it doesn't feel right, it won't end well. And we talk about in all of these sections big paradoxes, and I think there's this big amount of gut feeling, and the gut feeling is the assimilation of your whole system and your thought process, taking the pros and cons down to one thing. So that quote you just gave was gold. But I also do think as well, if it doesn't feel right, it won't end well. So just got to share that too.
Yeah, if it doesn't feel good, it won't end well. I'm not talking about intolerance for incompetence, because that's coming later. Someone else will. I just wanted to share that, for me, that was the big aha moment for that. So Nicole, thank you so much for jumping into that. Right now, let's Erik Jan Bijvank, who I will let you introduce yourself, but sometimes I call you Captain Corporate, and more recently I call you a breath of fresh air into a corporate environment. So Erik Jan, it is over to you, and I'll switch the slide.
Well, thank you, Chris, for that particular kind introduction. A very brief introduction is I'm entrepreneurial. I think I started a couple of organizations, well, they're still alive, which is a good thing. An advisor for organizations, corporates, mainly to do things like purpose, but also digital transformations and so on. So, in a nutshell. So talking about purpose, I think it's such an interesting topic and one that sort of helps us as individuals and organizations through life. So because, you know, imagine just for a little bit what it would look like if you would have no purpose, or if other people around you would have no purpose, or your organization would have no purpose. I mean, what would you do? You would go nowhere, I guess, or you would go everywhere. Like Einstein said, I mean, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there, but you have no clue whether it's the right end or right end result, and so on. So for me, I think the choice of purpose, or what kind of purpose you have, is a fundamental creative act. It means, to a certain extent, I think, that you understand and are aware that you can create. It does not really matter if it's on a personal level or for your organization. It just seems that if you have a purpose and you understand it and you live it, that you are, as an individual and as an organization, more able to use your creative capacity. And I think the shared purpose of the organization, once you have one, is the binding glue between all the people within the organization and the surrounding ecosystem. I mean, it's the reason for being, and that enables an organization to evolve from a command and control egocentric way of making decisions to a more ecocentric distributed model, you know, which can scale. So a lot of words there, but just telling people what to do in exponential organizations does not really work, well, unless you're in a crisis of sorts. But it's much more important to have them feel that you want to go in a particular direction. And like Chris just mentioned in his talk, is that if you can align people and let them do what makes them feel right and can support them, and I'll get to that. I would like to add one more thing there, is you also need them to give them the defined space in which they can actually realize that. So just let them go and support them helps, but you also need to sort of somehow, and that's a paradox of self-organizing or self-managing, I think, is you need to give them borders. As you cannot cross this, you need to be creative within this particular area, because otherwise you'll go anywhere, or could go anywhere. One of the things with respect to purpose that I noticed in an organization that I started some time ago with a friend of mine is that we had a purpose. We came up with it during a dinner, and basically it was very short, but we wanted to build fat shit. Now that seems a bit abstract, and I guess in certain ways it was, but somehow it resonated, and we grew, and clients enjoyed working with us, and were inspired by us because we just wanted to make really fat shit. I mean, like cool stuff that other people would not be able to build. And employees came as we grew, and intrinsically shared our intention and our purpose. So it felt as in a way as if people, or if someone magically turned on an on button on the magnet. So people kept coming, clients kept coming, employees kept coming, and so on. Obviously, growing very quickly comes with a lot of challenges and so on. We, at one point, I think, forgot a bit to keep the purpose alive. We still wanted to build fat shit, but it was a little bit more difficult to maintain it because, well, of the size and of growing and so on and so on. And so we forgot our purpose to a certain extent. And what we noticed is when we did that, when that happened, someone at one point challenged us and by saying, all right, I'll press the off button on the magnet effect and see what happens then. So purpose in exponential times, even when it gets really difficult to focus on the stuff that you back in the days started the organization for, is something that you need to keep alive. Purpose is an activity game. It is not something that you write on a paper and just leave. It's something that you need to push, live, feed. It's like a plant. If you don't feed the plant, it will die. So that happens with purpose as well. An activity game. I cannot stress that enough. And the lack of purpose, like I just said, will eventually sort of make you, perhaps as an individual, but also as an organization. I always need to be very careful with saying this, but it might become hollow. Like I just said, I mean, it's important to sort of repeat the purpose and to make sure that everybody lives that particular purpose. So the in exponential organizations, self-managing, like Chris just said, is an important element. If in any transaction that we do as an organization or as a person, we know what that is and where we need to go to, it becomes much easier to live it and to actually go towards that particular end goal that you've set, that is part of your purpose. Without it, like I just said as well, you will just hover and go nowhere. And especially, I think in this this time and age, the financial reward alone is being acknowledged more commonly as limited in its ability to motivate. So people are looking for the authentic inspiration to contribute to their own actions to achieving the targets of the company and of an individual. And I think it's precisely in the midst of a setback or challenging time, like I just said, that leaders should be actively encouraging positivity and focus on purpose and intention, because it really will help teams weather the storm. So there's so much more that I can really tell and say about this. But Chris, is there anything that you would like to add to this particular purpose part of the?
Well, I have two questions for you.
Yeah.
I would really love it if you explain your nickname Fresh Air, and because I also believe the reason I brought that up is because you are yourself, as an entrepreneur, as a leader, extremely purpose driven, and that purposefulness, if that's a word, in my observation, we're currently working with a very, very large, very traditional organization, and you're bringing innovative fresh air there. First question, fresh air. Second question, what is the purpose of your current initiative around VR training to prevent ethnic bias in policing? And you're presenting later tonight about that. So you've got about a couple minutes left. I'm curious if you could just bind your purpose message back into your current work. I would love to hear that.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll try. I think the fresh air part comes from I think the relief that people feel that if they're stuck and they ask for help or they reach out to have a discussion, is that in many cases the fact that they are stuck is due to the fact that they are trying to think their way out of a situation, so rationalize and so on, and to create steps as where purpose individually deeply felt like the direction of the heart. And if you try and follow that again, not pushing away all the other things that obviously you need to do when you're running an organization, but if you go back to your core, you will know what kind of decision you need to make, the one that feels best. I mean, it might still not be comfortable, but it will be the best choice, because in the end, if you make a choice that is deeply felt, comes from the heart, you will always be able to defend that particular choice, regardless of it being wrong down the line. Because you cannot predict whether a choice will be the right one or not. So deeply felt purposes, sticking to it, and making sure that people sort of take a step back, look at it, and work according to it. What I hear many times is this big sigh of relief, and I think that is part of the fresh air that I like to bring. And then the other one, the VR training, your question, which has to do with ethnic profiling, which is kind of a hot topic right now due to sad developments, is actually to bring more, trying to sort of put the right words there, is to like, we're at home working from our screens at this point in time, and missing, I guess, this particular excitement that you can feel when you actually meet people. I mean, the screen is nice, but it doesn't really sort of do what a physical meeting does. I think we need to up the game for experiences, and I think one of the ways of doing that, is through VR. It might sound a bit odd, but it is the closest we can get digitally to a deeply felt experience. Soon we might have like a smell and wind added to these experiences by having kind of equipment at home. But I think our goal is to let people experience more digitally, and then obviously through that particular channel we can help start dialogues on difficult topics, or make people make information more sticky because it was experienced in a more hectic way, and by default then it sticks longer and more profound. So that's a very long purpose, and normally I would go into organizations and say, like, right, so that particular purpose that you just said feels like a concession more than a goal. It's like you set down 6 or 8 of them, and you all wanted something to say about it, but it's basically to experience more is would be our purpose, I guess. Yeah, is that
great?
Is that the right?
Yeah, that's great. I'm not gonna talk about your dream of creating a smell and wind machine. That's something else altogether.
They're out there. Yeah, it's nice.
But yeah. I will attest that I have been able to immerse in this VR training, and I think it's, just consciously, and I'm sure unconsciously, it's very hard to separate because it's fully immersive. And what I like what you guys did with it as well is, of course, it's data based as well, because a lot of people, I don't have ethnic bias, and of course we all have ethnic bias, and actually having the data and tracking how long or how quickly they go to an encounter and engage people of the current behavior or look or smell in your case, or how long they wait. These are all fact-based, because data levels are arguments. These are fact-based observations that then the instructor and the counselor come back and say, what we have observed here is this, this, and this. What you remember is this and this, and the data says this and this and this, and then that can be such an enriching. So tonight, I think at 6-ish on this channel, you'll be there with presenting this topic. And there is some exponentiality there because, of course, this you can basically ship these devices and train people at some scale as opposed to one-on-one training. Paul Epping has commented in the meantime that he also apparently smell and temperature is already available, so maybe not the wind yet. But before that, he asked a question here, and I'd like to open this up, to the panel as well. He's challenging a little bit that we're using the word massive here maybe a little bit too easily. That massive might simply mean financial growth exponentiality, and so I'd like to open up to the group very temporarily, and then we'll get into rigorous experimentation. When we talk about massive transformative purpose, maybe Jaroslav is great for this one. What does that mean as opposed to just financial growth? You need to unmute.
Right. It's perhaps I can sort of, till Jaroslav comes in. I think massive is if it's not only financial, it also means, at least for me, on a deeper level. So it is the core reason for existence. If you talk about purpose, I guess. I mean, that's from that particular area. What do you think, Jaroslav?
Thank you. Well, I agree. I think the only comment I would make on this is that why it's kind of massive in the terminology, it's to invite us to think in very disruptive and new ways about things. Because if you want to improve something 10-20%, it's something you can do quite easily. But if you want to improve something 10 times or more, that's not that easy. And often actually disruptive things we see around ourselves in the market are like that. So part of the massive is definitely thinking completely differently about things, and not just kind of being an extension of what's already been done for many years, but actually rethinking different domains. And I think Elon Musk is a good example of that, where kind of his first principle thinking gets him to completely rethink domains and do things that nobody actually even thinks are possible. And so I think part of the why the word massive is there is to think of things so big that actually we can't just use what we've always done. We actually have to reinvent both ourselves and then what we do to be able to achieve them. And I think the other reason there, and we sometimes say you can have two kind of purposes. You can have a massive transformative purpose, MTP, but you can also have a transformative purpose, TP. So not all initiatives need to kind of grow and be a global one and everything. But there is space for transformative initiatives also on a local level. But partially it's also if you're resolving a big problem that people face around the world, customer problem, society problem. Those are some of the biggest opportunities, and why not to think of it in a massive way. So I think at least in the framework is not so much coming from a desire to achieve massive financial growth. It tends to be a byproduct. It does happen, but it tends to be a byproduct. But actually, it comes from a desire to completely rethink and to think of something that nobody has ever done. That's part of the massive. And the other part is, if you're really resolving a genuine problem that is helping customers, companies, businesses, society at large, why not to do it at a massive scale, at a global scale? So that's my perspective on that.
Great, thank you, Jaroslav. The next section is enable rigorous experimentation, and we had Sandeep, who was originally supposed to be here. However, he is unwell today. He's been a bit chatty and says it's probably just a normal cold. We wish him very, very well. Veenod has offered to step in. And I would also invite the rest of us as well for the next 10 minutes, 9 minutes to support Veenod in presenting this the very last minute before Jaroslav closes off with the last section. So Veenod, welcome. Can you introduce yourself quickly? Well, you already have, never mind. And get into rigorous experimentation. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Chris. Actually, thanks for doing that. I was about to invite the rest of the panel to jump in and help me with this. Not that I'm shy to cover this either. I really liked this. Purpose is a fundamental design creation act. I wrote that down. I'm going to steal that, Erik. It's a nice quote. So experimentation. I think the question is, well, if you think about experimentation, what are the things that come to mind? Right? And I'm going to suggest, right, without being too cheeky about it, that a lot of the times when people think about, say, let's experiment and so on, it's a loosey-goosey kind of thing, right? Let's play around a little bit. Let's see what sticks. And I still remember a quote that one of my engineering buddies colleagues used to have say, some 20 years ago, and he used to say, let's throw the spaghetti on the wall and see what sticks, right? And it's a very US term, I think. And I used to wonder at that time, saying, on what basis would you ever want to throw spaghetti at a wall, and of what purpose would it be to, if any of the noodles stuck on the wall? But nevertheless, I think I've often seen that experimentation is used as a surrogate for, sloppiness, lack of discipline, lack of process, because people are looking to bypass, right? They're looking for shortcuts for something that otherwise look, and typically, if you're on some sides of the business, you would put this all in a time or cost time framework and say, well, that's all take too long. Let's just experiment and so on. So I think the reality around it, if you want to get serious about this thing, I'll propose that experimentation should be more of a way of life. It ties in many respects to everything that we've been talking about here, right? All these components come together, for which the way that you approach life and the things that you're doing has to be sort of just a built-in experiment, which means that the attributes of what would those things be? You have to be open to results, right? You have to have a certain speed of reaction. You need to have rigor and discipline with respect to what it is that you're measuring, and you must adhere to those results. You can't just make it up. Right? And if you can institutionalize those things, then I suggest that you will get closer to some of the leading companies in this area. Some years ago, I took part in this Toyota Production Systems. The famous TPS that Toyota at that time in the US offered these courses, mostly meant for manufacturing. But I managed to sneak in there. And the question they asked was that if you had gone to the Toyota headquarters or any of the offices and you went in and asked somebody, who's responsible for quality here? They would kind of give you a blank look, because the answer was everybody, right? Everybody was responsible for quality, whereas in many of our companies we would say, no, go see Joe over there, and that's the quality department, and it's a one-off, right? So the example I was using from Toyota was, if you look at how they do things as an example, at every step of the way, they have the feedback mechanism, right? You can conduct your own mini experiment in the assembly line. They have very rigorous way of measuring the before and the after, and a very quick cycle to determine, is it, worth, following through on, right? And it is embedded at all the different levels, down from the, nuts and bolts all the way to the design, right? So just as a life concept, they have actually embedded things like this. So the basis of this thing, so one of my bosses used to say, right, an experiment is the most precise thing that you have to do, right? How would you know if you don't instrument it very well? And you could, what one has to avoid is to have a prejudice for the answer, right? You must set it up with the hypothesis and your paradigms and so on, because you're going to test something, and you're going to test to see whether that something is a valid answer or not. And the or not is as valuable as the yes, right? And when you set something like that up, there has to be actually a culture of discipline. Now, how many of you have been in companies? In fact, I would suggest that it's the majority, right? Where you have the, here, employees can put in suggestions for all kinds of creative things. Here's the box, and there'll be a group. I've been in all these companies where we always have a group that's supposed to collect all the creative ideas from employees and so on, and we'll vet them and say, oh, that's a very cool idea. This is how we can reduce call center cost and so on. And most of the time, those ideas never see the time of day, because it's not so much that you have enabled the first part of the experimentation, but all the adjacent processes and ways that a company is set up does not support experimentation. So regardless of an executive's intent, you say, come on, nobody will get fired if you experiment. Just take a chance, right? Has to translate into the way that a business actually functions, right? So what are your business processes around that? What are your approval processes for granting funds, right, to enabling those experiments? I mean, will that be allowed? Will your CFO have an issue with that? So it's all the different ways, I believe, right? And so when we talk about intolerance and incompetence, I think this is actually more this is what we have to actually fight, right? Is the lack of precision around the concept of an experimentation, and making it sound too much like a shortcut, when in fact the rigor around an experiment is actually what will save you, not just for the experiment, but for everything that you do as a business, right? Because the time to decisioning, as you get those results from the experiment, so many organizations, we have some colleagues here who have told us, like the ING Bank and so on, who have gone to an agile transformation, and this is a big deal in many companies, going through, the entire company is going to an agile transformation mode. It's actually very heavy, complex transformations that I don't, disagree should be done. But if you really think about it, it's trying to get, there's a speed element to it, but actually it's also an instrument, like the precision that an agile methodology gives you, even at micro step, right? So you get the results and you can act on it, and it's not that controversial, right? And it's really a time to decision. And you don't, in my opinion, you don't have to do it in such a heavy way if you understand the fundamentals of what an experimental ecosystem looks like, right? And how you transform that into a normal way of doing business, as opposed to a one-off. Let's go over here and do the experiment, as opposed to how do you live a life that is always experimental, right? And I'll use sort of a personal example, something I'm going through right now, actually. So, my son is one of these overachievers, and he signed up for this physics class over summer, right? God bless him. Intensive 6 weeks of physics. And somewhere 2 weeks, so it's now, this is in week 3. So he decided that he really likes this thing called the Indian tea. It's called the masala chai. And it's not everybody's cup of tea, to be corny about it. But so I started to make this thing in the morning, and there's the tea, there's the water, there's the milk, and there's assorted aromatic spices. And as I started to make this thing, every day I had to, modify the recipe. I wasn't quite getting it right. And, after the first week, I realized that I was in danger of repeating it, because I was not precise in what I was doing. I wasn't measuring out exactly how much water and milk, how long was I boiling it this time? Was I writing it down? Right? And actually, so this week I started with, of course, all the very precise measurements and all the changes that I was trying to see, but also a small questionnaire for my son, beyond a simple, do you like it? Did it taste okay to you or not? To just, like 5 more attributes about it. Was it bitter? Was it sour? How did it linger in the mouth? Did you get the sense of too much tannins? No, not enough. So that precision, I think, is what, if you set it up as a normal course of doing business, I think you can easily the quality and the speed with which you can operate to scale very fast. So I think this is very much tied to the scale and discovery elements, right, of an organization. That if you can do this first part well, right. I might have ignored this tolerance and failure, because the note I was making was, you cannot think of the outcome of an experiment in those kinds of, it's a failure or a pass. The result itself is what you're looking for, no matter what, right? There isn't a good result or a bad result. The result of an experiment will always be a good result, because it will inform you about what to do next, right? And that's what you don't see, enough these days. But let me throw it up to colleagues for some input.
Well, thank you so much. I think any result out of an experiment is valid if you're learning. I think because I think which is basically underlying everything you just now said. And thank you so much for stepping in there at the last minute. We need to hand over to Jaroslav for the last section, and then I, as moderator of Work Life Stage, need to tee up a video for the next session, and I've been having a little problems with that, so I'm going to focus on that. I've got some external help beaming in. I'm going to take myself off the stage. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. We'll see you. I will see you hopefully at 1 o'clock with a video running. If that fails, I'll see you at 1:30 with Paul Epping's discussion. So I will come back just before 1 and kick everyone off and set up the video. So if I can hand it over to Jaroslav, and then Nicole, if you would be so kind to wrap up and close the session, that would be so appreciated. Thank you, everybody.
I've actually got a few comments or questions at the end, but yeah, just thanks very much, Jaroslav. I'm always looking forward to what you've got to say. No matter how many times we chat about this topic, you always bring a different slant to it. So over to you, and thanks again for helping us with this whole endeavor.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Glad to be here, and thank you for the kind words. Just a brief introduction. My name is Jaroslav, originally Czech, but have lived in different places all around the world. I've had 15-year experience of being a consultant, trainer, coach. I'm kind of looking at 4 different areas: leadership, innovation, technology, and sustainability. And I think if I would summarize like a red thread through my career for the last 15 years, it's been those 4 areas. I run a small boutique consultancy looking at how leaders and organizations can build future resilience. I'm kind of handling this paradox of how you can be as ready and as prepared as you can for a future that is completely unpredictable and uncertain. And I've also been working with Salim Ismail, who is the author of the Exponential Organizations concept. And we've been building a global community. This is where I actually met Chris. We currently have almost 6,000 people in over 120 countries, all people interested in building a better future. That's the MTP, Transform the World for a Better Future. Entrepreneurs, thought leaders, speakers, and consultants. It's a very interesting group of people, and I'm sure there are some of them here on the other side. I can't actually see anybody who's on here. I'm just seeing the panelists, but I'm sure there are some people on the other side. And I've been working there as a chief learning officer, basically running their learning, training, and certification programs for the past couple of years. So let me get to the topic itself, which, as I've mentioned, it's kind of paradoxical because we all want to be as ready as possible for a future that is completely unknown. And there is this idea that there are unknowns everywhere. And for me, what that actually means is that, especially for leaders, is that today the path is made by walking. It's almost like, I know, was it like an Indiana Jones movie where he was like running over kind of a precipice or somewhere, and that actually, like, he couldn't actually see the bridge, and only when he started running over that kind of precipice, the bridge was appearing. It's kind of a little bit like that. I think, we are walking into the future, and the path is made by walking. And I think a crucial role of leadership actually is to be able to be in that kind of fundamental paradox of the unknown, and actually be able to structure and simplify the complexity, and be able to chart kind of confident and clear ways forward, knowing that they might also change tomorrow. But is that kind of paradoxical way of adding clarity, adding certainty, actually shaping reality, not just kind of waiting for what's going to happen, but actually doing our best to shape the reality, knowing that everything might change tomorrow. So it's this kind of a strange paradox. And I have gathered 5 kind of tips on that are actually fitting with what's on the slide, but 5 tips that I think are crucial for leaders to be able to do that today. So I'd like to share those with you, and maybe they can be of help as you chart your own path through the unknown as leaders. So the first one, I think it's very important to invest into knowing yourself. It's kind of the starting one, but besides the purpose, which we've discussed, there are other aspects of how we perceive the world and how we perceive reality that are very key. And I have actually 3 kind of in particular. There are personal triggers, so triggers, emotional triggers, and how we maintain ourselves at our best, actually knowing what triggers us and knowing which state, internal state, we are actually deciding from and making our choices from. And this is something that to many people is unknown. We just kind of go and we try to make the best decisions every day. But sometimes it is actually influenced by us being in a particular mood or us being triggered, and that can influence the quality of our decisions. So actually knowing your triggers, what are the things that trigger you, are very important. And from my experience, one of the key insights is that usually the kind of things that you value when they are not happening, this is where you can get triggered. You can get annoyed, angry, frustrated, whatever that is. And that is usually because there is something that is dear to you that you really care about, which will be called your values. And when that's not happening, you get triggered. So for example, if you value respect and somebody is disrespected in front of you, it is a trigger. Or somebody is disrespecting you or your time, it can become a trigger for you. So knowing your triggers and actually being able to manage them, and when you do get pulled off center, bring yourself back to the center, I think it's quite key for you to be at your best, to make the best possible decisions you can. The second element is biases. So knowing your biases, Daniel Kahneman, a Nobel Prize-winning economist, he kind of wrote an interesting book about that, Thinking Fast and Slow. I think there is probably like 30 or 40 biases which are completely unknown to us. And it's kind of a lost battle because we don't even know that they exist. So we don't even know what to look for. But actually, there are different ways that we can look into our biases. And I think Erik Jan was mentioning, a particular bias around specific, but those biases exist in all areas, confirmation bias and many others. And knowing your own biases is also key. Otherwise, you're just repeating things that are maybe not the best decisions. They are just kind of doing what you've always done because you have a particular bias and particular way of doing things. And that fits with the third, which is assumptions, actually. And in some of my leadership development work, I would actually have people journal on what assumptions they have about a market situation, about their career, about what they're seeing around them, about their organization. And you would be surprised how many times we actually are subject to completely unquestioned assumptions about the world around us that fully determine how we think, but we're just not seeing that. So those are like 3 kind of little elements of knowing self. There is much more to it. Actually, Yuval Noah Harari, as when asked, like, what's the best way to prepare for the future, he just says, like, know yourself. And his way to do that is by 2-hour Vipassana practice every day. So that's perhaps a bit extreme for some, but actually knowing yourself seems to be a great investment. Analogically to that, my second recommendation is to know your organization, and you probably have 3 key elements. You have the people in your organization, and that is key. So as much as you know yourself, you want to know your people, because they are, at the end of the day, the core competitive advantage. I think even for us as OpenEXO community, we have a platform, we have a methodology, we have tools, but the most precious thing we have is those 6,000 people, 5,500 people, and the culture we've been able to build. So knowing your people, knowing the visible things of your organizations, the processes, structures, and operations, is everything structured in the best possible way, but also knowing the invisible things. So what is the mood of the organization? What are some unspoken stories, unspoken rules? What is the culture, right? The way we do things around here. It's very key. So that's the second point, knowing self, knowing the organization. A third recommendation is to actually be confident in not knowing. Sometimes it seems that at least what we see kind of publicly, like leadership is either about knowing all the answers and being 100% confident, or when people kind of fail, or the environment and the life beats them up, then they go to the other extreme, which is I don't know anything, and they kind of give up and kind of quit. But actually, both of these are expression of what Carol Dweck would call the fixed mindset. So I either know everything or I know nothing. But actually, the truth is perhaps somewhere in the middle. It is you can be confident in the face of not knowing. So You can be, you can actually confidently say, I don't know what to do, but I will figure out, right? And it's a different kind of position than I know exactly what to do and we will do it. I don't know anything what to do and we'll just give up. And there is something in the middle, which is, I don't know right now how to address that, but I'm confident we can figure it out if we work together. And it's an invitation for collaboration as well. So this is kind of what she would call a growth mindset. Number 4, invest in the right things in terms of your growth. I'm kind of a little bit of geek on personal growth. I've been always very interested in that, and investing in different courses and reading books and doing all kind of different things. But I think it's also important to invest in the right kind of things. And I think as the environment around us is more and more uncertain, I think investing perhaps in skills is becoming tricky. I was just speaking about a month ago with somebody that spent 2 years studying a machine learning degree and learning how to code and create algorithms. And he was just saying, Jaroslav, now all of the things that I have studied painstakingly to actually be able to do and to code, I don't need them anymore, because with TensorFlow and other frameworks, you can just build things without actually knowing how to do it. You can kind of do it, much more easily. So basically, he was saying, my 2 years of studies became obsolete very quickly. So I think it's less about investing into skills, although skills still matter, obviously, and being able to do things well, it's still very important. But actually, as things are more and more uncertain, investing into kind of your mindset and the way you think and the way you actually approach any situation, being able to walk into a new situation and quickly get the skills that you need, and even relearn a new field that you didn't study or didn't know anything about just because you need to. There's a lot of people who are now picking up coding and learning how to code, although they have never done it before. So I think that's quite key, to have the right mindset that would enable to do that. And ultimately, I think is actually investing in your own character and your own sense of values and how you actually are able to navigate the world around as everything is uncertain. Because as things are uncertain, the only thing we are left with is our character and our life choices about how we approach our lives. And the final one is how do you resource yourself? And that's kind of the theme of the future, resilience. And that's maybe connected to what kind of support systems you have, what kind of people you have around you. How do you maintain your health, what you eat, even things like that. But also, in generally, just how do you resource yourself to be at your best, knowing that we don't know what the future will bring. And 4 or 5 months ago, we didn't know what the future will bring, and we had to resource ourselves, and more of that might be coming from all kinds of different reasons. So those are my 5 tips. Know self, know organization, be confident in not knowing, invest in the right things in terms of developing yourself, and resource yourself, build future resilience. Thank you for your attention. Handing over to Chris and Nicole.
Thanks,
Nicole, can you wrap up quickly? And then we've got like 30 seconds, and I'll throw you out.
Yeah, it will be quick now. Carry on. As always, lots of words of wisdom. I think that I mentioned earlier in my chat, technology is growing at an exponential rate, and we're talking about exponential times. But we've still not mastered the ability as individuals or organizations or people to consume change at the rate which technology is expanding. So those tips that you've mentioned, Jaroslav, they're just absolute gold. And it's not massive shift changes, it's lots of small incremental changes that will make a difference. And as we all know, doing that on scale is not easy and not for the faint-hearted. But yeah, I just want to say thank you very much for Chris and Jaroslav for, first of all, setting up the panel, getting us all in that room in Amsterdam in January. Can't believe we're here where we are just now. But now more than ever, this stuff really rings true. So thanks everyone for joining. Please have a read at the orange paper, and thanks everyone on the panel for coming along and getting involved. Really appreciate it.
Thanks everybody. Thanks Nicole. Thank you Jaroslav, Erik Jan, Veenod, Sandeep as well. Get better.
Bye now. See you later.